Now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Global Technopolitics Forum's research team on December 19, 2021. So we have a small group today, and I'd like to start with Puran. Puran, thank you very much for sending me both a reference and also your article. I haven't had time to look at it. I don't know if Greg did. Greg, did you have time to look at the article?
I did. I think I sent you some quick comments, Puran.
Yeah. I mean, I got it, Greg, and then I wrote back my side of the story in the morning today. So whenever you have some time, you might like to have a look at it, and then I'll be happy.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Because I find it quite interesting, and rather than just as a quick article, I wanted to turn it to a white paper, because that's the area of the forum that we didn't develop that much on sustainable development. And I think it's a good entry to start to develop and add to it. So it could become a nice white paper. That's why I'm emphasizing to make sure that's gonna be a lasting paper that then we can also distribute.
Absolutely, and Pari, from my side, two things. One, I'll be very happy to go over it, revise it, and the note which I have sent to Greg in the morning today is also copied to you. So please have a look at it. And what I have been trying to say there is that I have worked on that paper considering the lack of educational material for the student community in the global South. But that is also quite true in the global North. So one thing. The second thing that I have done is that I have tried to take a fairly rapid contemporary context of COP26. It was a mixed bag. It did not fail. It did not succeed. It rather moved the needle forward because US got back into it. Then we also had some important agenda like financing of SDGs, financing of climate as a part of it, technology and technology transfer, and then capacity building, which was supposed to be given by the global North to the global South. It hasn't really happened. So it's a mixed bag, so to say. Third thing, what I try and do is that I take the Hegelian dialectics, which is thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. I did not really try to make that philosophical foundation quite vivid because I didn't want to bore people or bore the readers. But then I've taken Hegelian dialectics, that how did the state and private sector, and then the evolution towards these two important actors for the said prosperity of society takes place. So I go back into the history and try and dip a little deeper. And then I come back to SDGs because COP26 or climate or environment are not really standalone, issues. They are very much part and parcel of SDGs. And then I talk about equity. I talk about some good practices from the global South and internationally. And then I come back to a point where I try and challenge the net zero concept. Net zero means that whatever we take from the earth, we give it back. I'm saying that is not good enough. 1.5 could be good enough, 2.0 could be good enough, but we are really going to go into the direction of creating net positive ecosystem, which is premised on the whole idea not only of net zero and 1.5 degree, but it is premised on the idea of how do we really fix our supply chain, how do we really fix sustainability, and how do we really go towards decarbonized circular economy. And this is how I end my, contention with regard to the theme which I have taken. It is primarily directed towards the student community in the global South, but that is true for the global North as well. So that's the broad picture which I have tried to sort of lay over.
Thank you very much. I think the structure is very good. As I said, I haven't looked at the article, but I think the structure is very good. There were some minor things to sort it out in terms of references and things, but I will look at now the new version and we take it from there. Greg, any comments?
No, I'll look forward to your comments, Puran, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of good stuff there.
Hello, Eduardo. I can see Eduardo has joined us as well.
Hello,
hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I'm transmitting live from a birthday party in the park.
Very
Oh, great.
So, Eduardo, do you have any update for us about your last presentation you had and the progress of your project?
The progress is that I'll be submitting the 2 chapters this week, as agreed with the editor at Oxford University Press. So I've included a lot of the comments that and the feedback that I got from you at the presentation. And also I showed it around to colleagues here at Mercy College and elsewhere, and I got a lot of feedback. So I edited the chapters, and they'll be ready for submission on the 23rd. So that's my plan with that. But I did I heard back from my colleague from the Guarani Institute, who was very pleased to join and meet you all. And of course, the research assistants, they were really very pleased to be able to join and have that experience. So thanks from them as well for allowing them to talk and be part of that session.
You were welcome.
Very good session. Yes.
Yeah, we were very glad to have them, and the recorded version will be on the website. So when I put it, I will send you a link and you can share it with everyone. So, yeah.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Yeah, because there was some things that I remember we said, and I wanted to include into the chapters. But some I was able to recall from memory, but some I think that by seeing the video in the recording, I'd be able to include those into the chapter better.
Sure, we will add that. So, Greg, any comment about our work, if you want to discuss anything that we have been doing?
Well, we've mostly been chugging away on the China white paper, making some progress, I think. It's getting there. It's going to be big, but we decided that we would leave it to be a pretty fulsome account. We think at least I think what is much like the piece we did on the governance of data, a kind of a sophisticated high-level primer that someone, say a congressional staffer or someone like that who wanted to get up to speed quickly on the issues could find most of the issues there. So that's what we're aiming at. I hope we can get that done in the next couple of weeks. I've been doing a fair amount of writing, op-edery. I did a piece in the article on our domestic situation, which is very concerning. It seems like we're already in some sense at the beginning of a kind of civil war. And the question is, will it be fought with weapons or with suits and different laws and maybe even secession? And then I've done for the LA Times, come out next week, a friendly critique of Biden's first-year foreign policy. You've heard me make some of those points in our previous conversations.
And following on Greg's comment in terms of the domestic issues, we are now trying to connect it somehow to technology and blockchain and to see what possibilities, positive and negative, is going to be unleashed with new technology. So we're working right now on that piece to see how we can, what would be the impact of new technologies, especially AI, IoT, and blockchain together, and using blockchain, decentralized autonomous organization kind of power. Paul, any reports from you? Any comments?
Yeah, so just a few things. So I just been hearing Puran talk about the North-South question and issues surrounding transfer of transfers from north to south. I just had come across something recently, an article that talked about north and south, but really from a definitional standpoint. So I don't know if that really relates at all or not. And it was sort of a little bit of not a really in-depth or heavy analysis, but it was sort of an idea of, we tend to use these terms quite a lot, north and south, but in fact, they're a lot less objective than people would think. and the writer sort of uses a number of examples. Once again, it's not really a deep piece, but it does make a point. And so I don't know if that has any relevance at all put onto what you're doing, or whether it would add any dimension to it. But I can certainly share the reference with you if that's of any help. The second,
please, to everyone. Paul.
yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I can do that. The second issue was, I saw something recently that was sort of interesting, and I'm not quite sure whether this plays into the China paper specifically, or whether there's some other area of interest that it connects to. But this whole issue, there's been this ongoing conflict between Lithuania and China. And it seems to me that the impression that I've had, at least in recent past, is that when China has not been happy with any given country's behavior, relative to China and critique of China, that China has usually responded directly to that country with economic sanctions, for example, or they've put pressure on imports, or had diplomatic pressure. But in this case, it seems like the Chinese are actually pressing the Germans to cut the Lithuanians out of their supply chain. So this is something, of course, that the U.S. does, puts pressure on third parties that are not directly involved in a conflict it might have with China or any other country. But it was something that I hadn't really come across or heard of before that China had done. So I don't know if this is a new strategy or new initiative or a one-off, but I wondered if that was something that worth investigating, and whether that played at all into the paper that you've been working through. And then the third issue or question was just on the subject of 2022 plans. A couple of weeks ago, there was some talk about some focus on Europe, as I remember. And I just was wondering where the thinking around that was, and whether there's any more definition about, what that focus might look like, and what the types of things would be that would be under investigation or of interest in support of that.
Greg, any comments?
Let's see. Maybe you want to say a word about Europe, Barry. I was just going to say, this is just a quip. I remember, apropos of your first point, Paul, I remember a conversation with a Brazilian diplomat soon after the fall of communism. And he said, we used to know exactly where we were. We were south, but not too far south. We were west, but not too far west. He said, now we have no idea where we are on either axis, which I thought was interesting. And as you say, these terms are sound more precise than they are.
And I think on your second point, in terms of China, I think the point you made would well sit in the piece we are writing, because we are also writing about diplomacy in China and how it's changing and what route it's taking. So I think that area of geopolitical pressures and supply chain matters there, right, Greg?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I have a question for you, Paul, and maybe also for Greg. I've been trying to figure out the situation with Russia and its brinkmanship in Ukraine, and especially how that plays out in terms of the Nord Stream pipeline and the Germans being pressured by us, the Americans, to not go forward with that. Paul? What do you think is China's strategy within that picture, Russia into Ukraine?
Oh, you mean what their position would be on that?
Yeah, because you're saying that they're pressuring like the Lithuanians to not go forward with some economic deals, and we're pressuring the Germans to not go forward with some economic deals with the Russians. So, and especially since it seems to me that the Russians and the Chinese, they both have the same playbook in terms of their territorial brinkmanship. Like they'll push, and they know that the costs for the West, so to speak, are too high in terms of any serious retaliation, both in serious economic sanctions or military positioning. And it just decade after decade, the gains are so real that they've been making. So I wonder, is there some synchronization there that's going on between Russia and China in terms of their policy?
Yeah, that's my view as well. I think that's what's happening. Greg? Sorry.
Well, no, I just well, just to clarify, the issue with Lithuania and China is up until now, like in cases like Australia, and so China has been putting direct pressure on Lithuania. In fact, Lithuania just a few days ago recalled all their staff from their embassy in Beijing, and so this is sort of traditional operating procedures. You know, the way China has dealt with countries that it wasn't pleased with. So you can think of Sweden, you can think of Australia, as I said, you can think of a number of other cases. But here's a case where China is saying, well, we're going to exact punishment on Lithuania, but I get the feeling that they probably don't have so much leverage actually over Lithuania. It's not a big country. I think the trade volume between the two countries is not very significant. But what they're doing is putting pressure on the Germans because the Germans do a lot more business with Lithuania, and saying, look, we're important to you, Germany, especially in the automotive industry. There might be some changes to your position in our market if you don't cut the Lithuanians out of your supply chains. And the Germans do a fair bit of business with Lithuania. So it's sort of an indirect, or sort of through a proxy, putting pressure on economic pressure on a country that they want to exact punishment on. So that's really the new, at least for me, seemed to be a new development or a new strategic initiative that at least I hadn't come across before. As far as China and the Ukraine, my own sense is, and Greg, maybe you've got some insights on this, but my sense is that China and Russia are certainly of a feather, at least on quite a lot of issues, and they've been getting a little bit closer, at least for public consumption. It looks like they've gotten a little bit closer. I still think there's a lot of issues between them that haven't been resolved, and some of those, now that we're talking about countries and borders, indeed relate to border issues in the northern part of China. But I think there has been sort of a little bit of a closer connection between the two of them, that they have some alignment on their policies. But I think as far as Ukraine goes, my thought is, and I haven't seen otherwise, that the Chinese will stay quiet, because their stated policy is that countries shouldn't get involved in the internal politics of other countries. And so Russia, in some ways, contradicting that. And so the Chinese are a little bit in a tough place, if on the one hand, their strategy is to be aligned and support Russia, but on the other hand, when anything comes to Ukraine, that sort of then it flies in the face of what the Chinese have been proponents of and supporting, for as long as I can remember. And it's gotten even stronger in recent past as the U.S. has gotten more active in the South China Sea, or in things that China feels are quite sensitive. So I don't know if that answered the question, or is sort of in line with what the question was, but maybe I'll defer to Greg for any other insights there or thoughts.
I think on Russia and China, I think I agree. There's seems to be quite a lot of tacit cooperation. I wouldn't say much more than that. They're certainly talking. We did a paper before I left the government the last time, asking would there be a kind of Sino-Soviet strategic alliance, and I think the answer then and still now is no. Partly because then we reckoned that China, unlike Russia, still cared some about us. But more important, that any alliance would be one in which Russia was the junior partner, not the senior partner. And that doesn't seem any part of Mr. Putin's imaginings. On Ukraine, I'm frankly puzzled. I've long thought that Putin was a better tactician than he was a strategist. And I don't really quite understand why he's doing what he's doing in Ukraine. It seems too much risk for too little gain. He risks a major conflict. And meanwhile, he's only pushing Ukraine further toward the West, which it seems to be not in his long-term interest. It may well be that he truly believes, when he talks about Ukraine, he sounds like it's 900, not 2100. With all this talk about Ukrainians and Russians being indivisible, being the same people, all that seems to me to be pretty counterproductive to his long-run aim. Obviously, his long-run aim is to rebuild some sphere of influence around Russia. But this I find what he's doing in Ukraine way too risky for way too little gain, but we'll see.
Do you think, Greg, that his maybe it's an issue more of playing to an internal audience.
I think
And
so.
that- And that it's not really, that in fact, it's maybe demonstrating that his position internally is weaker than we've made out, or that he's presented it to be, and that, that he's taking, I don't know if we could call it a desperate effort, but it's definitely a pretty provocative one, but to quell maybe internal dissent or people who were thinking that maybe he's not as powerful as he was.
No, I think that's right. I always try to remember and remind myself that most of what Putin says is intended, first of all and foremost, for domestic audiences. And I think that's exactly right. You've seen on, his numbers on, well, they're getting better on the economy because oil prices have been high and the economy's been doing better. But typically he gets much better marks for his behavior internationally than he does domestically. And obviously he's playing that card to some extent as well.
Puran, any comment from you?
Well, I would really like to go by the evidence between what is happening on the one hand between Russia and China, then what is happening in Ukraine, and why is it really happening that Chinese and Russians are coming together more closely in recent times. First thing first, if you really look at what Chinese are doing with Russians, they're really trying to talk about civilizational power, and the two are the Eastern powers, and if they are together, it would be hard for Americans to be able to exert any greater influence in that part of the world. So they are really trying to come together, not only in a tacit way, but if you really look at what is happening on Ukraine, Chinese military is there with Russia's military, and they have been undertaking joint military exercise. This is the part one. Part two is Russians are supplying their defense, equipments to Chinese. So it is greater than what we end up seeing with our naked eyes. They are coming together. Of course, as Greg said, the Chinese will never want Russians to be the big brother. And so will Russians not like Chinese to be a big brother to them. So it's a, marriage of convenience between the two, and they're coming together to put up a joint front to Americans because they know it very clearly that on their own, they cannot really do much. But if they come together, they could probably bring other influences as well. For instance, Chinese and Russians could bring North Koreans, which we are not talking about. And that could be a very deadly kind of a cocktail where 3 or 4 very bad powers could come together and try and create a havoc for the region and for everybody else. As regards, if you really go to Europe, Europeans are very suspicious both of Chinese and also of Russians, but they are intermingled, on 2-3 counts. One, that Europeans supply them the cheaper option of energy, which Europeans are not really able to decouple. So they will somehow willy-nilly go and, keep on doing things with Russians. When it comes to Chinese have got a lot of influence in Europe. And there's a lot of Chinese money and Russian money which has been invested in Europe. And Europe will find it pretty hard to decouple from these two countries. So they will really ping pong, and we will really have to see how it all goes. But Europeans and Russians and Chinese, they're all very deeply coupled with each other. And Russians do not really want NATO to be there in Ukraine because Ukraine is planning to join NATO. And if the NATO comes to Ukraine, it will become sort of a problematic situation for Russians. So Russians don't want Ukrainians to join NATO. So it is not one piece. It is military, it is NATO, it is America, it is cheaper gas supply to Europeans. So it is a mix of everything and a very deadly cocktail. We will have to really wait and watch.
I'd add to that cocktail the signal that this is giving to countries like North Korea and Iran on matters of non-proliferation. Since Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons arsenal, and they find themselves now with their territorial sovereignty compromised, similar with Gaddafi in Libya, I think. This is a signal that I believe in Iran and in North Korea is pretty clearly received. And I think that plays into the cocktail you were talking about as well, Puran.
Yeah.
Actually, on the relationship and just the current appearance of the relationship between Russia and China, I'm not quite so sure that as much as, once again, for public consumption, it looks like they've gotten closer, that they in practice really are that friendly as on any front. I mean, I think there are two signs of that. One is about 4 years ago, a sort of Chinese version of Nord Stream 2 went in, right? So this is between Russia in the Far East and a pipeline that connected to China. And there's a lot of fanfare about that, and, that made the news. But in fact, the bulk of China's oil comes from the Middle East, and especially Saudi Arabia, and that hasn't changed. And they get oil from South America or Latin America. That's sort of the second tier in Nigeria. But any oil that they're getting from Russia is pretty minimal in the whole grand scheme of China's energy strategy and portfolio. So it might look like, there's this great alliance between the two countries and over something as important as oil, but it really doesn't count for much, or at least as far as I can see. And the second thing is the Belt and Road Initiative. There's a lot of fanfare too about connecting China to Russia, the whole idea of this rail line that was going through Kazakhstan that would then go through Eastern Russia and over the Urals. And, but the fact is, and I think that hasn't changed, is that the gauge of the trains is different. So as far as I know, that's still an issue, and that slows things down quite substantially. So, I think that's a little bit symbolic of the current relationship between the two. There's a lot of grandstanding and a lot of fanfare and a lot of photo ops, but when you get down into the weeds and the details where things usually count, I'm not so sure that there's been such a rapprochement, or that there's so much, strategic alliance that otherwise would appear.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah. Okay, any other reports, any other comments from anyone? No? In this case, I think next week we are not going to have any meeting, and then we postponed it to the New Year. So the first Sunday of New Year, we will get together. Meanwhile, I wish all of you a wonderful week and a wonderful holidays, and Happy New Year to all of you, and see you in the coming year. Take care.
Yes. Good holidays.
Thanks,
everybody.
Marty.
Have a good week.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.
Bye.